Between 1847 and 1863, in a locked room on a Virginia estate, something happened that 3 county clerks would later refuse to document in public records. The few people who witnessed the truth spoke of it only in whispers. A bearded woman kept in isolation, 3 unmarried sisters who gave birth to 7 children, and a distinguished physician who called it scientific research. When Union soldiers discovered the room in April 1863, they found chains embedded in the floor, medical instruments of unknown purpose, and a journal written in cipher. The officer who read that journal 43 years later would write in his personal notes, "I have seen battlefields and mass graves, but nothing disturbed me like understanding what transpired in that room." The case involved a woman the family referred to only as the specimen, someone whose very existence challenged every assumption about human biology and whose captivity served purposes that no court of that era had language to prosecute. 17 miles from Charlottesville, buried in fragmentary records and testimonies taken decades after the fact, lies a story so disturbing that 2 generations tried to erase it from history. Before we continue with the story of what really happened in that eastern wing, and why a bearded slave woman became central to one family's darkest secret, make sure to subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into America's most disturbing historical mysteries. And please, comment below telling us what state or city you're listening from. We love knowing where our audience of truth seekers is located. The question that will haunt you for the next hour is simple. What could possibly justify keeping a human being locked away for 16 years? The spring of 1847 arrives cold and damp across the Virginia Piedmont. In Albemarle County, 17 miles southwest of Charlottesville, morning fog settles into the valleys like spilled milk, and the air carries the smell of wet earth and wood smoke from 1,000 chimneys. Covington Manor sits on a rise overlooking 800 acres of cultivated fields and forest. The main house, Georgian brick with white columns, speaks of old money and older certainties. Inside, Dr. Edmund Covington stands at his study window, watching the fog burn off under weak March sunlight. He's 41 years old, balding, with the kind of methodical precision that makes him both an excellent physician and an unsettling dinner companion. His 3 daughters move through the house with practiced quietness. Sarah, 22, sits in the morning room with a Latin text open on her lap, though her eyes keep drifting to the window. Elizabeth, 20, practices piano scales in the parlor, the same scales over and over until the repetition becomes almost hypnotic. Margaret, just 17, helps the household staff prepare breakfast, her hands efficient but her mind clearly elsewhere. The girls grew up without a mother. Caroline Covington died in 1832, and Edmund raised his daughters himself, or rather, raised them according to principles he'd developed through careful study. He educated them beyond what was typical for Virginia girls of their class. They read philosophy, studied mathematics, learned basic anatomy from his medical texts. He told them knowledge was power, and power was survival. What he never told them was what kind of knowledge he was actually seeking. In the quarters behind the main house, 37 enslaved people wake to another day of work. They know the routines of Covington Manor intimately. When to be visible, when to disappear, when to speak, when silence is the only safe response. The doctor isn't cruel by the standards of Virginia slaveholders, but there's something about his attention that feels worse than cruelty. He watches people the way a naturalist watches insects under glass. Silas Fletcher, the senior field hand, stands outside his cabin and studies the main house in the distance. Something's changing. He can feel it the way animals feel storms coming. The doctor's been agitated for weeks, reading letters late into the night, making trips to Lynchburg and Richmond. Something's coming to Covington Manor, and Silas knows from long experience that when masters get excited about new acquisitions, enslaved people pay the price. He's right. That afternoon, a covered wagon arrives at the manor. The doctor himself goes out to meet it, which is unusual. He normally sends an overseer to handle such things. But today he's there at the wagon bed, speaking in low tones with the driver, then reaching up to help someone down. Mamie Dalton, working in the kitchen garden, catches a glimpse of the new arrival. At first, she thinks it's a young woman. The figure wears a simple dress, moves with a certain delicacy. But then the person turns, and Mamie sees something that makes her drop the basket of herbs she's carrying. A beard. Not thick stubble or a few stray hairs, but an actual beard. Dark, visible, growing across a face that otherwise looks entirely feminine. The doctor leads the newcomer directly into the house through a side entrance Mamie's never seen used before. They disappear inside, and the door closes with a sound of finality. By evening, the household staff has pieced together fragments of information. The new arrival is named Jordan Tinsdale. She came from the Tinsdale estate near Lynchburg, sold at auction after old Charles Tinsdale died. The price was unusually low, $340, because no one else wanted to bid on someone so peculiar. The auction master had listed her as female, age 19, unusual aspect, unsuitable for normal labor. What made Jordan unsuitable is apparent to anyone who sees her. The beard that grows despite her feminine features, her voice that falls somewhere between male and female registers, the way her body seems to confuse every expectation of what a woman should look like. Dr. Covington sees something else entirely. He sees the rarest of medical phenomena walking into his home, a living example of what physicians are only beginning to understand about human development, about the ways bodies can develop characteristics of both sexes, about the mysteries of generation and heredity. He sees an opportunity that might never come again. That first night, Jordan sleeps, if sleep is the right word, in a room in the eastern wing of the house. It's not the quarters where other enslaved people live. It's not a bedroom in the family section. It's something in between, a space that was once a storage room, now hastily furnished with a bed, a washstand, a chair. The door has a lock on the outside. Jordan sits on the edge of the bed, still wearing the dress from the auction, and tries to understand what's happening. She's been owned by 3 different people in her 19 years. She's been stared at, examined, discussed like a curiosity or a problem to be solved. But she's never been brought into a master's house like this, never been given a private room, never been the focus of such intense interest from someone with the doctor's particular expression. Not lustful, not even cruel, but fascinated, clinical. She thinks maybe that's worse. Downstairs, Dr. Covington sits in his study writing in a leather-bound journal. His handwriting is small, precise, excited. Acquired today, the subject I have long sought, a clear case of hermaphroditic development in the human species. External examination reveals predominantly female characteristics, including breast development and feminine facial structure, but with notable androgenic features. Facial hair growth, deeper vocal register, and reports from the previous owner of strange anatomy that requires private verification. The scientific possibilities are extraordinary. This may provide the key to understanding questions of heredity, of the transmission of characteristics, of the very mechanisms of human generation. I must proceed carefully, methodically. Everything must be documented. He writes for another hour, planning examinations, measurements, observations. Only once does he pause, pen hovering over paper, and a flicker of something, doubt, conscience, crosses his face. Then he continues writing. In the eastern wing, Jordan lies awake, listening to unfamiliar sounds of a house settling around her. Through the small window near the ceiling, she can see a rectangle of night sky. She tries to remember what freedom felt like, but the memory is already distant, already fading like the stars behind moving clouds. She doesn't know yet that this room will be her entire world for the next 16 years. She doesn't know about the examinations to come, about what the doctor will discover during those examinations, about the use he will find for her once he understands her unique biology. She only knows that something bad is beginning, and there's no one to help her stop it. 3 weeks pass. Jordan sees no one except Dr. Covington, who brings her meals himself and conducts what he calls preliminary examinations. He measures her height, her weight, the circumference of her skull. He asks detailed questions about her monthly cycles, her medical history, her family background. He sketches her features in his journal with unsettling accuracy. Through it all, he's polite, clinical. He explains what he's doing in medical terminology that means nothing to Jordan. He treats her not cruelly, but with the distant courtesy one might show a laboratory animal. On the 21st day, he conducts the examination that changes everything. Jordan stands in the examination room while Dr. Covington completes what he calls a comprehensive physical assessment. When he finishes, he steps back with an expression of pure scientific triumph. "Remarkable," he says, more to himself than to her. "Truly remarkable. External female characteristics, but with internal male structures. Testicular tissue, a rare form of intersex development. And if my hypothesis is correct..." He trails off, already lost in thought. Jordan doesn't understand most of what he's saying. She only knows that something in his demeanor has shifted from curious to determined. That evening, Dr. Covington calls his daughters into his study for what he terms an important family discussion. Sarah, Elizabeth, and Margaret sit in the leather chairs facing their father's desk, uncertain what this is about, but trained from childhood to listen attentively when he speaks. "I have made a significant scientific discovery," he begins, "an opportunity that may never present itself again. I need to explain something to you about human heredity, about reproduction, about the advancement of medical knowledge." He talks for over an hour. He uses careful language, medical terms, appeals to their education and intelligence. He frames everything as research, as progress, as their participation in something historically important. He explains about Jordan's unique biology, about questions that could be answered, about knowledge that could be gained. Sarah, the eldest, is the first to understand what he's actually proposing. Her face goes pale. "Father, you cannot be suggesting..." "I am suggesting nothing improper," he interrupts smoothly. "I am proposing a carefully controlled scientific study. You are educated women. You understand the importance of advancing human knowledge. What I'm asking requires sacrifice, yes, but sacrifice in service of something greater than ourselves." Elizabeth and Margaret sit frozen, not yet fully comprehending but sensing the shape of something terrible taking form. Dr. Covington continues, his voice calm and reasonable. "You are my daughters. I have raised you to value knowledge, to understand that progress sometimes requires courage. This research could change our understanding of human reproduction. It could establish our family's name in medical history, and it requires subjects who are intelligent, healthy, and willing to participate in carefully documented procedures." "Willing?" Sarah's voice is barely a whisper. "You have a choice," her father says, though his tone suggests otherwise. "You can agree to participate in this research, or you can choose to leave this house with nothing. No support, no prospects, no protection. You know what happens to unmarried women without family resources in Virginia. You know the alternatives. It's not a choice. It's coercion dressed in the language of options." Margaret, youngest and most sheltered, starts to cry. Elizabeth sits rigid, her hands clenched in her lap. Sarah meets her father's eyes with a look of betrayal so complete it will haunt her for the rest of her life. "When do these procedures begin?" Sarah asks, her voice hollow. "We will start slowly, give you time to prepare mentally. I will arrange everything with proper medical precautions. You will not be harmed physically, I promise you that." He believes his own promise. In his mind, what he's proposing is a medical procedure, no different from any other treatment. He has convinced himself that science justifies anything, that knowledge gained outweighs any temporary discomfort, that his daughter's participation is a gift to posterity. This is what makes Dr. Edmund Covington truly dangerous. Not malice, but absolute conviction in his own rightness. The daughters leave the study in silence. They go to Sarah's room and sit together, not speaking, not crying, just existing in the shared horror of understanding that their lives have fundamentally changed, and there is no escape. In the eastern wing, Jordan sits in her locked room, unaware that she has just become central to a plan that will destroy everyone it touches. Herself, the daughters, the children who will be born. Everyone except the man who designed it all. The first procedure happens 3 weeks later, in April 1847. Dr. Covington prepares the Eastern Wing room with medical instruments, cleaned linens, detailed notes. He explains to Sarah, again using careful clinical language, exactly what will happen. He treats it as a medical appointment, a treatment, a procedure. Sarah goes to that room feeling like she's walking to her own execution. What happens behind that locked door cannot be detailed here, not because it's too graphic for telling, but because some acts resist description, even by those who endured them. What can be said is this: when Sarah emerges 2 hours later, she is fundamentally changed. Something in her eyes has died. She walks back to her bedroom like a stranger in her own body. Jordan stays in the Eastern Wing, alone with the weight of what has been done through her, with the knowledge that she was used as an instrument of violation, with the horrific understanding that this is likely only the beginning. Dr. Covington retires to his study and writes detailed notes about the procedure, timing, conditions, observations. He notes Sarah's distress, but attributes it to natural nervousness about medical procedures. He is already planning the next session, calculating optimal timing based on his theories of conception. In the quarters, the enslaved people of Covington Manor sense that something terrible has happened in the main house. They don't know details, but they know the quality of silence that follows trauma. They've heard that silence too many times before. Mamie Dalton, carrying linens upstairs later that evening, catches a glimpse of Sarah through a partially open door. The young woman sits by her window, staring at nothing, her face reflecting the kind of devastation that comes not from a single moment of violence, but from the betrayal of trust by someone who should have protected her. Mamie wants to ask if she's all right, wants to offer comfort, wants to do something, but she knows the rules. Enslaved women don't question what happens to white daughters in their fathers' houses. To ask would be to invite punishment. So she walks past, carrying the clean linens, maintaining the silence that allows horrors to continue. The household settles into an uneasy rhythm. Days pass. Weeks. Dr. Covington continues his research, conducting additional sessions with Sarah according to his calculated schedule. He takes meticulous notes. He treats everything as scientific inquiry, never acknowledging, perhaps never truly seeing, the human cost of his experiments. By July, Sarah shows signs of pregnancy. Dr. Covington's journal entry that day contains genuine excitement. The hypothesis appears confirmed. Successful conception has occurred. This proves that the subject possesses functional reproductive capability despite predominantly female external presentation. The implications for our understanding of human generation are profound. He notes Sarah's physical symptoms with the same clinical detachment. Morning sickness is recorded as expected maternal adaptation. Her depression is emotional volatility common in early gestation. Sarah herself barely speaks anymore. She moves through the house like a ghost, performing her duties mechanically, avoiding mirrors, avoiding her sister's eyes. Elizabeth and Margaret watch their sister's transformation with growing dread, knowing their turn is coming. In September, Dr. Covington begins the same process with Elizabeth. The pattern repeats: the careful preparations, the clinical language, the locked room, the emerged daughter who is no longer quite herself. Elizabeth handles it differently than Sarah, not with silent withdrawal, but with frantic compliance, as if perfect obedience might somehow make it hurt less. It doesn't. By November, both daughters are visibly pregnant. Dr. Covington begins crafting the fiction that will explain these pregnancies to the outside world. He invents the Hartwell family, 3 brothers, traveling merchants, conveniently away on business. He creates entire backstories for these fictional men, complete with correspondence he writes himself and signs with invented signatures. The lie is elaborate and completely unnecessary. No one outside the household will question too closely. Virginia society in 1847 is full of strange family arrangements. of children raised by aunts, of absent fathers. Dr. Covington's reputation as a respectable physician provides cover for almost anything, but he creates the fiction anyway, not for others, but for himself. He needs to maintain the illusion that what he's doing is socially acceptable, that his daughters are having normal reproductive experiences, that he's not systematically abusing everyone under his authority. Sarah delivers in March 1848. A daughter, healthy, normal, beautiful. Dr. Covington records the birth with clinical precision, weight, length, time of delivery, observable characteristics. He notes with interest that the child shows no unusual features, appears entirely typical in development. Sarah holds her daughter and feels something break open inside her. A rush of love so fierce it's almost violent, mixed with shame so deep it threatens to drown her. This child is innocent. This child is hers. This child is also proof of what was done to her. How does a mother reconcile loving someone whose very existence reminds her of trauma? Sarah names her daughter Ruth. She doesn't explain why. She doesn't explain anything. She just holds Ruth and cries silently while her father takes measurements and writes notes. 3 months later, he begins sessions with Margaret, the youngest daughter. Margaret is 17 years old. She has watched what happened to her sisters. She knows exactly what's coming. The night before her first scheduled procedure, she tries to run away, makes it as far as the edge of the property before Silas Fletcher finds her. "Please," she begs him. "Please help me get away. Please." Silas looks at this white girl, this child really, and feels the familiar agony of powerlessness. He's enslaved. She's free. But somehow they're both trapped by the same man's will. "I can't," he says, and hears how hollow the words sound. "If I help you run, he'll kill me. Might kill my family too. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Margaret returns to the house. The next day, she goes to the eastern wing. When she emerges, something in her has crystallized into rage so cold it will sustain her for the next decade. The household of Covington Manor settles into its new reality. 3 daughters, pregnant in rotation. An enslaved woman kept locked in the eastern wing, used for purposes no one outside the family understands. A respected physician conducting what he genuinely believes is important research, and slowly, inevitably, children are born. The years accumulate like sediment. 1848 becomes 1849, becomes 1850. Children appear with mechanical regularity. Sarah delivers twice more. Elizabeth adds another child. Margaret has her first. 7 children total by 1856, all supposedly fathered by the invisible Hartwell brothers. The house fills with the sounds of childhood. Crying babies, toddler laughter, children's questions. The daughters become mothers, teaching their children to read, to behave, to navigate a world that seems normal, but is built entirely on lies. Mamie Dalton, still working in the household after nearly a decade, watches the children grow with complicated feelings. They're beautiful children, bright, healthy, curious. They call their mothers Mama, but have been taught that their fathers are away on business. The oldest, Ruth, is now 8 years old and starting to ask uncomfortable questions. "When will Papa come home?" she asks Sarah one morning. Sarah's hands freeze over the breakfast dishes. "Soon, darling. Papa will come home soon. But Papa will never come home because Papa doesn't exist." Jordan remains in the eastern wing, her life reduced to a cycle of isolation punctuated by the doctor's visits. She's now 27 years old, but looks older. The years of confinement have left her thin, hollow-eyed, moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has stopped expecting anything from life. The doctor still brings her meals personally, still conducts his examinations, still uses her for his research whenever his calculations determine the timing is optimal. He treats her with the same clinical courtesy he always has, never cruel, never kind, just relentlessly methodical. Sometimes, during the procedures with the daughters, Jordan tries to make eye contact with them, tries to communicate something, sympathy, or shared understanding or apology. But the daughters keep their eyes closed or fixed on the ceiling. To acknowledge Jordan as a person, to see her humanity, would make the whole situation impossible to endure. So everyone maintains the necessary fictions. Jordan is a specimen. The procedures are medical research. The children are gifts from traveling fathers. Everything is fine. Except nothing is fine. In 1851, Dr. Marcus Whitfield visits Covington Manor to consult on a medical case in the county. He's an old colleague of Edmund's from medical school, and he arrives expecting pleasant conversation and professional consultation. What he finds instead troubles him deeply. "Your household is unusual, Edmund," Whitfield observes carefully over dinner. 3 daughters, 7 children between them. Yet I see no husbands, no male relatives, just you and the children, and your daughters. The fathers are traveling, Edmund explains smoothly. The Hartwell brothers, merchants and military men, often away on business. All 3 brothers married your 3 daughters. That's quite a coincidence. Not a coincidence, a deliberate family connection. We value keeping relationships close. Whitfield doesn't quite believe this, but what alternative explanation could there be? He lets the matter drop. Later, searching for medical supplies, Whitfield tries a door in the eastern wing and finds it locked. "What's in there?" Edmund's expression hardens almost imperceptibly. "Storage. Medical specimens, not relevant to your visit." That night, alone in the guest room, Whitfield writes in his journal, "Something is wrong at Covington Manor. I cannot articulate what, exactly, but I have the distinct sensation of a household maintaining elaborate pretenses. Edmund has always been eccentric, but this feels like something more troubling. However, without evidence of actual wrongdoing, what can I say? That I have suspicions? That the atmosphere feels wrong? These are not grounds for action." He leaves the next morning, his suspicions unvoiced, his concerns dismissed as perhaps being uncharitable toward an old friend. The silence holds. The children continue to grow. Ruth, now 10 years old, has become especially close to her cousin James, Elizabeth's eldest son. They play together, study together, occasionally whisper about how strange it is that they've never met their fathers. "Do you think they're real?" James asks one afternoon when they're alone in the library. "Mama says they're real." Ruth answers carefully, "That's not what I asked." Ruth looks at her cousin and sees her own doubts reflected there. "I don't know. Something feels wrong, but I don't know what." They drop the subject, but the seed of questioning has been planted. In the quarters, the enslaved community has developed its own understanding of what's happening. They don't know details. How could they? But they know Jordan exists. Know she's kept separate. Know the daughters keep having children without any men around. "Doctor's doing something unholy," whispers one of the field hands during evening gathering. "Using that woman somehow. Don't know how, don't know why, but it ain't natural. Natural or not, ain't our business," Silas says firmly. "We got enough to worry about keeping ourselves alive without wondering about white folks' secrets." But privately, alone in his cabin at night, Silas thinks about Margaret begging him to help her run away all those years ago. He thinks about the look in Jordan's eyes the few times he's glimpsed her being moved between rooms. He thinks about the daughters who no longer smile, who move through life like people serving sentences. He thinks about how slavery isn't just about field labor. It's about power. And power, unchecked, creates monsters. Dr. Covington, approaching his 60th year, shows no signs of slowing his research. His journals fill shelf after shelf. Detailed observations of the children's development, notes on inherited characteristics, theories about the transmission of traits. He's convinced he's on the verge of significant scientific breakthroughs. In reality, he's simply documenting the consequences of prolonged abuse. By 1860, Sarah is 35 years old, Elizabeth 33, Margaret 28. They've spent 13 years living in their father's constructed reality, raising children born from circumstances they never chose, maintaining fictions that grow more elaborate with each passing year. The oldest children are teenagers now. old enough to notice inconsistencies, to ask harder questions, to sense that something fundamental doesn't make sense about their family, and the nation around them is fracturing. Political tensions between North and South intensify. Talk of war fills newspapers. Virginia debates secession. The world that allowed Dr. Covington to operate with impunity for over a decade is beginning to crack. In the Eastern Wing, Jordan sits by her small window and watches the seasons change. Spring to summer to fall to winter, year after year. She's 33 years old now, has spent half her life in this room, has been used in ways she still doesn't fully understand how to name. Sometimes she tries to remember what hope felt like. Sometimes she tries to imagine a future beyond these walls. Mostly she just exists, day to day, waiting for nothing in particular because wanting something would hurt too much if it never came. The household continues its routines. Meals are served. Children are taught. Dr. Covington writes his notes. The daughters move through practiced motions of maternal care while carrying unspoken trauma. And outside, in the spring of 1861, the nation goes to war. The Civil War arrives in Virginia, not with a single dramatic moment, but as a slowly tightening pressure. Fort Sumter falls in April 1861. Virginia secedes in May. By summer, Confederate recruiters are moving through Albemarle County, taking young men for military service. Dr. Covington is too old for conscription, and his position as a civilian physician makes him valuable to the community. He continues his practice, treating injuries and illnesses, maintaining his reputation as a skilled if somewhat cold practitioner. The war barely touches Covington Manor's daily routines at first. The harvest continues. The children continue their lessons. The daughters continue their silent endurance. But war has a way of destabilizing careful constructions. In March 1862, Confederate authorities begin more aggressive requisitioning of supplies. A quartermaster captain named James Rutledge arrives at the estate to inventory resources for military seizure. Dr. Covington receives him cordially, shows him through the property, provides detailed lists of available grain and livestock. Everything proceeds routinely until Captain Rutledge becomes disoriented in the main house's hallways. Seeking what he thinks is the rear exit, he opens a door in the eastern wing. The door that's supposed to be locked. Inside, Jordan sits on her bed, wearing the same simple dress she's worn for years, her hair pulled back, her beard, now fuller after 15 years, covering the lower half of her face. She looks up at the sudden intrusion with eyes that have forgotten how to register surprise. Captain Rutledge stares. Jordan stares back. "Who are you?" Rutledge asks. Before Jordan can answer, Dr. Covington appears behind the captain, his face tight with controlled anger. "This is a medical patient under my care. Private quarters. I must ask you to respect patient confidentiality, Captain." Rutledge backs out of the room, apologizing, but his mind is working. A bearded woman locked in a private room? A patient who needs to be kept separate? Something about the situation feels wrong, though he can't quite articulate what. He completes his inventory and leaves. That evening, in his camp, he mentions the incident to other officers. Covington's got someone strange locked up in his house, a Negro woman with a full beard. Claimed it was medical care, but the way she looked at me, like she was begging for help. The story spreads the way unusual stories do among soldiers. Something to talk about between drills, an oddity to speculate on. Most dismiss it as just another wealthy eccentric keeping unusual servants. But a few people remember it, file it away as something potentially significant. Meanwhile, the enslaved community at Covington Manor senses opportunity in the war's chaos. News reaches them through the underground network. Union forces are advancing. Lincoln has issued proclamations about freedom. Escape to federal lines means liberation. Silas Fletcher, now 53 years old and exhausted from decades of bondage, begins quiet discussions with others about the possibility of running. They would need timing, resources, knowledge of Union positions. They would need to leave when the doctor is distracted. But before they can formulate a plan, federal forces arrive first. April 1863. Union cavalry under Major Henry Barrett sweeps through Albemarle County on a raiding expedition. Covington Manor is on their list of estates to search for Confederate supply caches. They arrive on a cool spring morning. Major Barrett, a pragmatic officer more interested in military objectives than morality, orders his men to conduct standard searches of the property. One of his soldiers, Private Samuel Meredith, is assigned to search the main house. He works methodically through rooms, noting valuables, checking for hidden weapons or documents. Then he tries the door in the eastern wing. It's locked. "Dr. Covington," he calls down the hallway, "I need access to this room." Edmund appears, his face carefully neutral. "That's a patient's private quarters. Medical confidentiality requires—" "Nothing requires confidentiality during military search, sir. Open it, or we'll break it down." Edmund unlocks the door. Private Meredith enters and sees Jordan for the first time. His report, written later that day, captures his immediate impression. Found in locked room. Negro woman approximately 35 years age, with unusual facial hair growth. She appeared in adequate physical health, but profoundly disturbed in manner. When I asked why she was locked in, she looked at Dr. Covington and then said very quietly, "Ask him. Ask him what I'm for." The doctor claimed she was a medical patient with unusual anatomy requiring observation. The woman laughed, not a happy sound, and said, "Observation, yes, that's what he calls it." Major Barrett is summoned. He questions Jordan directly, and for the first time in 16 years, she speaks freely to someone who isn't her captor. The story comes out haltingly, painfully. Years of isolation, of being used for purposes she still doesn't fully understand, of procedures that happened behind locked doors, of daughters who came and went from her room looking increasingly broken. Barrett orders his men to search the house more thoroughly. They find Dr. Covington's journals, shelf after shelf of them. Most are in English, some in cipher. They find detailed anatomical drawings. They find correspondence with other physicians discussing unique research opportunities. And when Barrett confronts the three daughters, Sarah now 38, Elizabeth 36, Margaret 30, the full scope of what's been happening at Covington Manor finally comes into light. The daughters' statements to the Union officers are heartbreaking in their exhausted honesty. Sarah, "He told us it was science. He made us believe we were contributing to human knowledge. But science is just a word. What he did was—" "I don't have words for what he did. And Jordan, she never had a choice. We barely had a choice. But she had less. She was property. We were daughters. He owned us all different ways. Elizabeth, I tried to make it not real. Tried to think of it as medical treatment, as something that was happening to someone else. 16 years of trying to not be present in my own body. The children, I love them desperately. But they're also evidence of everything we endured. How do you explain that to them? How do you tell your child the truth about how they came to exist?" Margaret, "He destroyed us all. Jordan most of all. At least we have each other, have our children, have some purpose beyond just existing. Jordan has had nothing but that room, and whatever he required from her. If you're going to arrest anyone, arrest him. If you're going to help anyone, help her." Major Barrett arrests Dr. Covington on the spot, though under what charge he's not entirely certain. Military law during wartime is chaotic. What crime has actually been committed? Abuse of enslaved people was legal under Virginia law when it began. The daughters can't claim rape. Legally, they had no right to refuse their father's directions. But everyone present knows something monstrous happened here, even if the law has no adequate language for it. Dr. Covington, under military custody, shows no remorse. I conducted research that advanced human understanding. My methods were sound. My daughters participated with full knowledge of the scientific importance. The subject, Jordan, was well cared for throughout. Nothing I did violated medical ethics as they existed when I began this work. He genuinely believes this. That's what makes him so disturbing. Not doubt or guilt, but absolute conviction in his own righteousness. Major Barrett faces an impossible situation. The war is still raging. He has no clear legal authority over civilian matters. The case is so unusual that no precedent exists for how to handle it. He makes a practical decision. Dr. Covington will remain under house arrest while Barrett submits reports to his superior officers. The daughters and children will remain at the estate for now. Jordan and the other formerly enslaved people will be relocated to a contraband camp where freed people are gathering under federal protection. The day Jordan leaves Covington Manor, she walks out through the front door, something she's never done before. She carries nothing because she owns nothing. 16 years of her life compressed into the simple act of walking out of a house. Mamie walks beside her, having chosen to leave with the other freed people. As they reach the road, Mamie glances back at the manor. "You ever want to see that place again?" she asks Jordan. Jordan doesn't look back. "No, never. I don't want to remember it. I want to forget every day I spent in that room. I want to forget what I was used for. I want to forget the daughters' faces. I want to forget the doctor's voice. I want to forget all of it. Can you forget?" "No, but I can try." They walk toward the contraband camp, toward something resembling freedom, though neither of them quite knows what freedom means after so many years of having none. Behind them, Covington Manor sits quiet in the spring sunlight, looking like any other Virginia estate. Beautiful, peaceful, normal. Only the people who live there know what happened in the eastern wing. Only they know what kind of monsters can be created when authority goes unchecked, when science becomes an excuse, when human beings are reduced to instruments of someone else's curiosity. The contraband camp outside Charlottesville sprawls across what was once a tobacco field. Hundreds of formerly enslaved people crowd into makeshift shelters, tents, lean-tos, converted barns. The Union Army provides minimal support, some rations, some medical care, but mostly just the promise that they won't be returned to bondage. Jordan finds herself in this chaos with no preparation for how to exist as a free person. She's 35 years old, but has the life experience of someone who's spent 16 years in a single room. Everything overwhelms her. The noise, the crowds, the choices she's suddenly expected to make about where to sleep, what to eat, where to go. Mamie stays close, guiding her through basic decisions, but even Mamie can't help with the deeper problem. Jordan doesn't know who she is, beyond what she was used for. Other freed people in the camp try to be kind, but Jordan's appearance makes social connection difficult. The beard, the ambiguous voice, the way her body doesn't quite match any category people understand. It all marks her as different, and different means isolated even among people who are themselves outcasts. She finds work doing laundry, simple physical labor that requires no interaction. She moves through days mechanically, speaking to no one unless necessary, sleeping fitfully in a corner of a crowded tent, existing but not quite living. Private Burke, one of Major Barrett's soldiers, makes several attempts to talk with her. He's genuinely concerned, genuinely trying to help. But his questions, how do you feel? What do you want to do? What are your plans? Make no sense to Jordan. I don't feel, she finally tells him one afternoon. I don't want, I don't plan, I just am. That's all I know how to do. You're free now, Burke says, trying to sound encouraging. You can make your own choices. Jordan looks at him with eyes that have seen too much. Free to do what? I've been locked in a room since I was 19. I don't know how to be free. I don't know what I'm supposed to want. And even if I did, this, she gestures at her face, her body, makes me a curiosity anywhere I go. People stare, people whisper, people wonder what I am. At least in that room, only one person stared. The conversation haunts Burke. He writes about it in letters home, trying to process what he learned at Covington Manor, trying to understand what justice would even look like in this situation. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Dr. Covington remains under house arrest, confined to his property but otherwise comfortable. His daughters and grandchildren continue living there, maintaining routines out of sheer necessity. The children need to eat, need lessons, need some semblance of normalcy. But normalcy is impossible now. The 7 children, ranging from age 3 to 15, sense that something fundamental has changed. Ruth, the eldest at 15, confronts her mother, Sarah, directly. The soldiers were asking questions about father, Ruth says, about where he came from, about who our fathers really are. Sarah's hand still on the mending she's doing. What did you tell them? I told them I'd never met my father, that he was traveling. That's what you always told us. Ruth's voice is sharp with emerging anger. But that's not true, is it? There is no traveling merchant named Samuel Hartwell. You made him up. Sarah sets down her sewing and meets her daughter's eyes. For 16 years, she's maintained lies. For 16 years, she's protected her children from truth. But the structure is collapsing, and she can't hold it together anymore. No, he's not real. Then who is my father? Sarah closes her eyes. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you tell your daughter she was conceived through coercion, that her grandfather used an enslaved woman to impregnate his own daughters, that her very existence is evidence of crimes so disturbing that Major Barrett had no legal framework to prosecute them? Someone who had no choice, Sarah finally says. Someone who was used, like we were used, by someone we should have been able to trust. Grandfather. Yes. Ruth sits with this for a long moment. She's 15 years old, intelligent, educated by her grandfather's own curriculum. She understands biology. She understands power. She understands what her mother is saying without saying it explicitly. The woman with the beard, Ruth says quietly. The one the soldiers freed. She's our father. Biologically, yes, but father isn't the right word. She was a victim, Ruth. Just like your aunts and I were victims. Just like you and your cousins are victims of circumstances you never chose. Ruth starts to cry. Not gentle tears, but wrenching sobs that come from suddenly understanding that her entire life has been built on foundations of horror. What are we? What am I? Sarah pulls her daughter close. You are my child. You are loved. You are not responsible for how you came into this world. None of this is your fault. But Ruth can't hear comfort through the noise of her collapsing worldview. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family, about her place in the world, all of it has been revealed as fiction built on suffering. The other children learn the truth in similar ways over the following weeks. Some from their mothers, some from overheard conversations, some from putting together fragments of information. Each responds differently: anger, confusion, denial, grief. But all are fundamentally changed by the knowledge. Just when we thought we'd seen it all, the horror in this story deepens further. If this account is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who appreciates dark historical mysteries. Hit that like button to support our work uncovering these forgotten truths, and subscribe to Liturgy of Fear so you never miss stories like this one. Let's discover together what happened next to this shattered family. In May 1863, military authorities finally reach a decision about Dr. Covington's case. The legal complications are insurmountable. The initial acts occurred under laws that have since been voided by war. The victims include white women who can't testify against their father under Virginia law. And the whole situation is so unusual that no precedent exists for prosecution. They release him from house arrest with a stern warning and notation in military records. No trial, no punishment, just a mark in a file that will likely never be examined again. Dr. Covington returns to full control of his estate and his household. For the daughters, this is devastating. They had hoped desperately, impossibly, that the Union Army would provide some form of justice, some acknowledgement that what happened to them was wrong. Instead, their father simply resumes his position as head of household, and they're expected to continue as before. Margaret can't accept this. The rage she's been compressing for 16 years finally breaks through. 3 days after her father's release from restriction, she walks into his study where he sits writing, as if nothing has changed. "You destroyed us," she says, her voice shaking. "You destroyed Jordan. You destroyed your own daughters. You destroyed those children who now know they're the product of whatever you want to call what you did. And you face no consequences. None." Edmund looks up from his journal. his expression one of mild irritation at being interrupted. I conducted research, important research. The military authorities understood that, even if they couldn't publicly acknowledge it. What I did was scientifically sound. Scientifically sound, Margaret repeats. You raped your own daughters through another person. That's what you did. Call it research if you want, but that's the truth. I never touched you inappropriately. No. You just arranged for someone else to do what you wanted done. That's not better. That's worse. Edmund sets down his pen with precise care. You're overwrought. Understandable given recent disruptions. But you need to remember that this family's survival depends on maintaining dignity and discretion. These outbursts help no one. Margaret stares at her father and realizes with horrifying clarity that he genuinely cannot see what he's done as wrong. He has convinced himself so thoroughly that his actions were justified that genuine remorse is impossible. He is beyond redemption because he sees no need for redemption. She leaves his study and goes to her room. There she sits at her desk and begins writing letters. To her sisters, to her children, to anyone who might one day want to understand what happened at Covington Manor. She writes for 3 hours, recording everything she can remember, every detail of 16 years of horror. She seals the letters and hides them in different locations throughout the house. Then she goes to the kitchen, tells Mamie, who has returned to work at the manor despite being freed, that she needs laudanum for a headache. The request isn't unusual. Laudanum is common for pain management. Mamie brings her a small bottle. Margaret takes it to her room. That night, she drinks the entire bottle. Sarah finds her sister's body the next morning. Margaret lies on her bed looking almost peaceful, with a letter pinned to her nightdress addressed to Sarah. I cannot continue. I have tried for 16 years to survive what Father did to us. I have borne children from that survival. I have watched those children grow up confused and damaged by secrets we had to keep. And now, after everything, he faces no punishment. He will continue as he always has. I cannot watch that. I cannot be part of this household anymore. I am tired, Sarah. So deeply tired. Please tell my daughters I love them. Please tell them this is not their fault. Please tell them that sometimes survival requires leaving, and sometimes the only way to leave is this. The household erupts into chaos. Dr. Covington, upon learning of Margaret's death, shows clinical interest in the effects of laudanum overdose, but little emotional response to losing his daughter. He notes the details in his medical journal. This callousness breaks something in Sarah. She has endured everything, the procedures, the pregnancies, the lies, the years of silence. But watching her father treat Margaret's death as merely another medical observation destroys her last fragment of restraint. She gathers her children and Elizabeth's children. She tells them they're leaving immediately. She doesn't ask her father's permission. She simply begins packing. When Edmund discovers what she's doing, he tries to assert authority. You can't leave. This is your home. Where will you go? Anywhere, Sarah says, her voice cold and final. Anywhere that isn't here. Anywhere that isn't under your control. You have no money, no support. You'll be destitute. Then we'll be destitute. But we'll be free of you. Dr. Covington, for perhaps the first time in his life, seems genuinely uncertain. His carefully constructed world is disintegrating. His research subjects are leaving. His control is evaporating. If you leave, he says finally, you leave with nothing. I'll disown all of you. You'll have no claim to the Covington name, no inheritance, nothing. Good, Sarah says. I never want to hear the name Covington again. They leave that afternoon. Sarah, Elizabeth, and 7 traumatized children, taking only what they can carry in 2 small wagons. The household staff watches them go, saying nothing but understanding everything. Dr. Covington stands on his porch and watches his family disappear down the long drive. Then he returns to his study and continues writing in his journal, as if this is simply another data point in his ongoing research. In the contraband camp, Jordan hears about Margaret's death through Mamie, who comes to visit. The news affects her more deeply than she expected. She barely knew Margaret, saw her only during those awful sessions in the Eastern Wing. But Margaret was 19 when it all started, younger than Jordan was. Margaret spent her entire adult life trapped by her father's plans, and now she's dead. She couldn't survive what was done to her. Mamie says quietly, "Shame of it is, neither could you really. You're alive, but you're not living. None of y'all are truly alive after what that man did." Jordan doesn't respond. What is there to say? That evening she makes a decision. She can't stay in this camp, in this county, anywhere near Covington Manor or the memories it holds. She needs distance. She needs to disappear into somewhere no one knows her story. She approaches the camp administrators and asks about the colonization efforts she's heard discussed. Freed people being given opportunities to emigrate to Liberia, to build new lives in Africa, far from everything that happened in America. The process takes months to arrange. But in October 1863, Jordan boards a ship in Hampton Roads bound for Monrovia. She takes nothing with her but the clothes on her back and a heart so heavy with trauma that she can barely feel it beating. As the ship pulls away from the American coast, she stands at the rail and watches Virginia disappear into the distance. She doesn't feel relief or hope. She feels nothing except the numbing certainty that nowhere will ever feel safe, that she will carry that locked room with her wherever she goes, that freedom is just another word for existing without chains, but with all the same scars. The last anyone in Virginia hears of Jordan Tinsdale is a brief mention in a letter from a missionary in Liberia in 1865. A carpenter named Tinsdale has established a small workshop here. Keeps to herself. Excellent craftsmanship, but declines all social invitations. Seems to prefer solitude. Whether this is the same Jordan from Covington Manor, no one can say with certainty. But if it is, then at least she found work, found peace in creating things with her hands, found distance from a past that had tried to define her entire existence. The years roll forward. The war ends in April 1865. The nation begins the painful process of reconstruction. Virginia's old social order collapses, and new structures slowly emerge from the rubble. Sarah and Elizabeth, living in Baltimore under assumed names, struggle to raise their children in anonymity. Money is perpetually scarce. They work as seamstresses, laundresses, whatever pays. The 7 children grow up knowing they're hiding from something, but not always understanding what. Ruth, now 17, takes a job as a teacher's assistant. She's intelligent, capable, determined to build something good from the broken pieces of her life. But the knowledge of her origins haunts her. She catches herself checking mirrors obsessively, looking for signs of Jordan in her own face, looking for the beard, the ambiguous features, anything that might mark her as different. She finds nothing. She looks entirely ordinary. But the fear remains. Back in Virginia, Dr. Edmund Covington continues his practice. Patients still come to him, fewer than before, and whispers follow him everywhere. But he maintains his professional dignity. He's 60 years old now, still writing in his journals, still convinced that history will vindicate his research. In the summer of 1865, he receives a letter from a former colleague, Dr. Prescott, asking about the unusual case that military reports mentioned. The inquiry is carefully worded, academically curious, non-judgmental. Edmund responds enthusiastically. Finally, someone who might understand the scientific importance of what he accomplished. He writes detailed letters explaining his research, the subjects involved, the outcomes observed. He offers to share his journals, to collaborate on a paper that might be published in medical literature. Dr. Prescott's response is not what Edmund expects. I cannot in good conscience participate in documenting research conducted without consent of all parties involved. What you describe, regardless of scientific merit, represents serious violations of human dignity. I must decline your offer and strongly recommend you cease any attempts to publish this work. Edmund, reading this letter in his study, feels genuine confusion. Violations of human dignity. But science must sometimes require difficult choices. Progress requires sacrifice. Why can't people understand that? He files the letter away and continues writing in his journals. which now contain not just medical observations, but long philosophical justifications for his work. He's writing for posterity, for future scientists who will understand what he accomplished, who will see past the temporary moral qualms of his contemporaries. One evening in late summer, he sits in his study working on these entries when he hears someone enter the house. Footsteps in the hallway. The study door opens. Sarah stands there, 39 years old, thin from hard labor, her face etched with lines that shouldn't be there for another decade. "Father," she says, "we need to talk." Edmund sets down his pen. "You left. You disowned the family name. What brings you back?" "Margaret's grave. I came to visit Margaret's grave, and while I was here I realized I needed to ask you one question." "What question?" Sarah steps fully into the room, and Edmund notices she's carrying something, a small pistol, common enough for travelers in these uncertain times. She sets it on his desk, not threatening, just present. "Do you feel any guilt at all?" Sarah asks. "Any remorse? Any recognition that what you did was wrong?" Edmund considers this seriously. He's always prided himself on honest self-examination. "I conducted research that I believed, and still believe, was scientifically valuable. I ensured that no one was harmed physically. I provided for everyone's material needs. I documented everything carefully. Could I have proceeded differently? Perhaps. But given the circumstances and opportunities available, I acted in ways that advanced human knowledge. So no, I don't feel guilt in the way you're asking." Sarah nods slowly, as if she expected this answer but needed to hear it confirmed. "You destroyed multiple lives, mine, Elizabeth's, Margaret's, Jordan's, 7 children's, and you feel no remorse because you call it science. Science requires difficult choices sometimes. It wasn't science. It was abuse dressed in scientific language. But you'll never see that, will you? You'll die convinced you were right." "I am right." Sarah picks up the pistol. Edmund tenses slightly but doesn't move. His daughter stands there holding the weapon, looking at him with an expression that contains no anger now, just exhausted finality. "I came here thinking maybe I'd kill you," she says quietly. "Thought maybe that would feel like justice, but now I realize you're already dead in every way that matters. You killed everything human in yourself years ago when you decided people were just specimens. Killing your body wouldn't accomplish anything." She sets the pistol back down on his desk. "I'm taking some of your journals with me, the ones that document what you did. I'm going to hide them where someday, maybe, someone will find them and understand what kind of monster you were. Not for my sake, I'll be dead before anyone cares, but for Jordan's sake, for Margaret's sake, for the truth's sake." Edmund starts to object, but Sarah is already gathering journals from his shelf, a dozen volumes, heavy with years of observations. She loads them into a bag she brought. "Goodbye, Father. I hope whatever hell exists has a special place for people like you." She leaves. Edmund sits in his study, surrounded by the remaining journals, and feels for perhaps the first time in his life a flicker of something that might be doubt. But the flicker dies quickly. He returns to writing, convinced that posterity will understand, that future scientists will see past these emotional objections, that his work will eventually be recognized for its importance. He's wrong. 3 months later, in November 1865, Dr. Edmund Covington dies. The official cause is listed as heart failure. He's alone when it happens, slumped over his desk, pen still in hand, mid-sentence in a journal entry explaining why his research was misunderstood. No one attends his funeral except the minister required to perform the service and 2 men hired to dig the grave. He's buried in the family cemetery on the estate next to Margaret, beneath a simple marker with his name and dates. The estate is sold immediately afterward. The new owners, a family from Pennsylvania with no knowledge of what happened there, find the house's eastern wing unsettling. The room where Jordan was kept feels wrong somehow, cold even in summer, oppressive, heavy with something they can't name. They demolish that section of the house in 1867, reducing the eastern wing to rubble and building a new addition that has no connection to what was there before. The journals Sarah took are hidden in various locations. Some she buries, Some she gives to trusted friends with instructions to keep them sealed for decades. She wants the truth preserved, but not immediately available. Wants time to pass before her children's grandchildren might encounter this history. Decades pass. The 19th century becomes the 20th. The people directly involved die, one by one, taking their immediate memories with them. Ruth Brennan, she changed her surname when she married, lives until 1919. She becomes a respected teacher, raises 3 children of her own, never tells them about their grandmother's ordeal or their biological grandfather's identity. She carries the secret until her deathbed, when she finally tells her eldest daughter a simplified version. Your great-grandmother suffered terribly. Your great-grandfather was a cruel man. That's all you need to know. Elizabeth survives until 1928, working as a seamstress in Washington until her fingers can no longer hold needles. She maintains correspondence with one of her sons, who becomes a printer in Chicago. In her final letters, she writes, "I hope you build a better life than the one I had. I hope you never have to pretend to be someone you're not. I hope you can be simply and honestly yourself." The 7 children born at Covington Manor scatter across America, living under assumed names, building families, carrying trauma they can't fully explain even to those who love them. Some thrive despite their origins. Others struggle with depression, with relationships, with the weight of secrets that can't be shared. By 1900, most people in Albemarle County have forgotten about the peculiar case at Covington Manor. Or rather, they remember that something odd happened there but can't recall details. The story becomes vague local legend. A doctor who did something strange, daughters who left under mysterious circumstances, an enslaved woman with an unusual appearance. But specifics fade like old photographs left in sunlight. In 1908, a historian named Dr. Martin Prescott, son of the physician who refused to collaborate with Edmund Covington, discovers some of the sealed journals while researching antebellum medical practices. What he reads disturbs him so profoundly that he debates for months whether to make the information public. He finally publishes a carefully worded paper in 1909 titled A Case Study in Medical Ethics, Coercion and Consent in Antebellum Research. He uses initials instead of names, focuses on ethical implications rather than sensational details, and treats all victims, Jordan, the daughters, the children, with respect. The paper causes limited discussion in medical ethics circles, but doesn't reach popular awareness. It's too academic, too careful, too uncomfortable for broad readership. The Covington Manor property changes hands multiple times. By 1920, the main house is divided into apartments. By 1940, much of it is demolished. The land is subdivided and sold. Houses are built where the fields used to be. A small shopping area occupies what was once the entrance drive. The family cemetery remains, overgrown and forgotten behind a new housing development. Dr. Edmund Covington's grave marker tilts at an angle, its inscription worn nearly smooth by weather and time. Margaret's grave beside it has no marker at all, her name erased as thoroughly as she tried to erase herself in life. In Liberia, if the carpenter Tinsdale mentioned in missionary reports was indeed Jordan, she would have lived out her years in relative obscurity, building furniture, maintaining solitude, finding whatever peace was possible for someone carrying such trauma. Missionary records mention the carpenter's death around 1891, aged approximately 63. The death certificate lists the name as simply J. Tinsdale, with no further details. Whether this was Jordan from Covington Manor remains uncertain. But if so, then she achieved what she most wanted. Distance from the past, anonymity, a life defined by her own choices rather than someone else's use for her. The historical record grows sparse and fragmentary. The story of Covington Manor becomes one of thousands of troubling cases from American slavery and its immediate aftermath, known to specialists, unknown to general public, too disturbing for comfortable discussion. But the effects ripple forward through generations. The descendants of those 7 children carry genetic inheritance from Jordan without knowing it. They carry psychological inheritance from trauma they never experienced directly, but that shaped their parents' and grandparents' behaviors. They carry the weight of secrets that were kept to protect them, but that also isolated them from their own history. By 1950, perhaps a dozen people alive still know the full truth of what happened at Covington Manor between 1847 and 1863. Most of them are elderly descendants of the original children, now confronting questions from their own grandchildren about family history that doesn't quite make sense. Some choose to tell sanitized versions of the truth. Others maintain the silence their mothers and grandmothers maintained. A few write it down, sealing the documents with instructions that they only be opened after certain dates, giving future generations the choice about whether to confront this history. The case shows us something uncomfortable about how easily human beings can rationalize harm when they convince themselves they're serving higher purposes. Dr. Covington genuinely believed he was advancing knowledge. He never saw himself as a monster. He saw himself as a dedicated scientist, making difficult but necessary choices. This is perhaps more disturbing than simple cruelty would be. The recognition that ordinary people, intelligent people, educated people can commit extraordinary harm while maintaining their own sense of righteousness. The story also shows us how systems of power, slavery, patriarchy, medical authority, can combine to create situations where multiple people are victimized simultaneously, but in different ways. Jordan had no agency because she was enslaved property. The daughters had limited agency because they were unmarried women under their father's legal control. Even the children, born free and white, were victimized by circumstances they never chose and secrets that shaped their entire lives. No justice was ever served in any meaningful sense. Dr. Covington faced no criminal charges, no professional censure, no social ostracism. He died in his bed, surrounded by his journals, convinced he'd contributed to human knowledge. Jordan found freedom but not peace, escaping physical captivity but never escaping the psychological impact of 16 years of use and isolation. The daughters found distance but not healing, living under assumed names, working hard jobs, raising children while carrying trauma they could never fully express. The children found normal lives but never quite felt normal, always sensing something wrong at their foundations, always carrying the weight of secrets that couldn't be named. This mystery shows us that some horrors don't involve ghosts or demons. They involve human beings making choices, rationalizing those choices through whatever language serves their purposes, and then living with or running from the consequences. What do you think of this story? Do you believe all the truth was ever revealed? Or do you think even more remains hidden in archives and family secrets across America? Leave your comment below. If you found this historical investigation compelling and want more stories exploring America's darkest corners, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who appreciates historical mysteries that challenge us to confront uncomfortable truths. See you in the next investigation.